Is your character wielding a weapon they don't intend to use? That may not be the best idea for them. Or us, actually. This is the FightWrite podcast, a writer's resource for fight scenes, action, and violence. I am Carla Hoke. First things firsty, if you have stumbled upon this podcast, there's also a corresponding blog at FightWrite, FightWrite.net. So give it a look. It's been in Writer's Digest top websites for writers 2 years in a row. And also check out my book, FightWrite, How to Write Believable Fight Scenes with Writer's Digest /Penguin Random House Books. Also, I will be teaching in July at the Realm Makers Writers Conference in St. Louis. You can look that up on the Realm Makers website, Realm Makers, RealmMakers.com website, and you'll get all the information about it. And I have to say, it's a really, really good conference for especially newbies. It is geared toward writers of speculative fiction. If you don't know what that is, you may not be one. It's generally sci-fi, fantasy, dystopian, supernatural, all the kind of groovy, weird stuff. That's what it's geared toward. But honestly, just about all genres will get something out of it. And it tends to be a little smaller than some of the conferences, maybe several hundred people, like 200-300 people versus 500-600 people. And the teachers and the speakers, they all mingle with the writers. While you are having lunch, you may be eating with an agent that you would like to pitch something to. You may be sitting next to me. You may be sitting next to Frank Peretti, who is the keynote speaker this year. So that's something I really, really appreciate about the Realm Makers Writers Conference. And also you can go to my classes. I'm teaching a 3-part class in that one on injuries. And you can also make some one-on-one appointments with me to kind of kick around ideas for your fight scene. I will also be at the Writer's Digest National Conference in New York City. I think it's Midtown Manhattan. You can look that up at writersdigestconference.com. I forget, Steve Bojalian, Chris Bojalian, I think is the keynote for that. I will be teaching a 2-part course. And for the life of me, I don't remember what it is, but guess what? It's going to be good. That I know. I'm definitely teaching 2 classes that I know. And of course, the Writer's Digest Conference is absolutely fan-flippin-tastic. That's where you get to go and hang out with the really awesome bigwig writers. Not me, but bigwig writers. I don't know. I think it's cool that I know I got to stand next to, Celeste Ng. I don't know. I think it's cool. Anyhow, 2 great conferences. Give them both a look. Okay, I have a regular post on the Writer's Digest blog about, guess what? Writing fight scenes. Imagine that. In my February or March post, I forget which one, I made a statement about threatening with a weapon, which caused a wee bit of stir on the social media, and there were several writers who didn't necessarily agree with it. Okay, here's what I wrote. Our characters should never use a knife simply to intimidate because the presence of a blade immediately ups the stakes. What might have been a fist fight where a few punches are thrown then everyone goes home would become a fight to spare one's life. That's a very different why for fighting. And if you've read my previous posts, you know that when you change the why of a fight, you change the fighter. So as far as our characters brandishing a blade, if they show, they better go. Okay, the stir was about using a weapon to intimidate. Some writers felt it was absolutely fine to do and could be productive in making an assailant back off. And I really do understand that thinking. It makes sense just on the outside looking in. It seems like a smart move. The examples that writers used were mainly regarding like soldiers and law enforcement holding people at bay with weapons, and that's not what I was talking about. And I thought I had cleared that up in the post, but people didn't remember it, so apparently I didn't cover that part very well. Also, stands to reason that just because our characters shouldn't do something doesn't mean they won't. I think we all know what I'm talking about. Sometimes our characters do things they're not supposed to do. And if you're not a writer, I know that doesn't make sense, but the weird thing about writing is once you get that story going, even if you have an outline, sometimes the story just takes its own turn. You start writing and another idea pops into your head, and the next thing you know, you've turned left rather than right. And sometimes in the midst of writing, you will see that, your character's personality in a very different way. And so you understand, well, maybe they would do this instead of this. So, yeah, there will be times a character might intimidate with a weapon. If you, as a writer, think that's the best thing for that scene, then go ahead and write it. However, you got to be aware of the possible consequences, easy for you to say, of threatening with a weapon. Okay, number one, consequence of threatening with a weapon, the stakes of the fight go up. What might have been a shouting match or posturing might become something quite different in the presence of a weapon. Yes, the menacing character might back off, but they might not. If your character threatens with a weapon, they have to be ready for the latter and willing to take action. I think sometimes our characters are silly enough to think that what they think is going to happen is what happens. And I think we all know in real life, the only thing you can count on is that anything can happen. So you can't be certain that that bad guy is going to back off just because your character has brandished a weapon. If they're not willing to use the weapon that they brandish, they may cower in the face of opposition and drop the weapon or have it taken from them. That ain't good. That weapon becomes a liability rather than a safeguard. And let's not forget that the villain might have a weapon too. And they might have been fine to keep it hidden. But now that another character has, shown their weapon, the stakes are up. And so now the villain's like, well, hey, guess what? I got one of those too. And they use it. So number one, the stakes of the fight will go up. 2, the legal implications change. Now, obviously, this will be great. This will depend upon your genre and the era of the setting of your work. But if it is modern day, if you are a crime, thriller, mystery writer, anything like that, and it's happened in modern day, you got to know the legal implications of using a weapon. And in my book, there is an entire chapter on the legal ramifications of self-defense. It is written by a black belt friend of mine who is also a lawyer, and he was a self-defense lawyer who I think he worked with gun rights for a while, so he definitely knows his stuff. When a person feels that their life is in danger, they have the right, in most states, they have the right to defend themselves. However, it's not just a matter of what a character sees as reasonable self-defense. What you and I think is reasonable self-defense doesn't necessarily matter. Ultimately, it's whatever a jury sees as reasonable, and that may be vastly different than what your character thinks or what you think. Again, if you defend yourself and you end up arrested and you go to court, what is considered reasonable is whatever the jury decides as reasonable. So if you have a jury that if your character has used a gun and your jury is full of people who are very anti-gun, then reasonable may be different for them than a jury that are all, hunters, gun owners. So you have to take that into account. It's not what your character sees as reasonable, it's what the jury sees as reasonable. Okay? So, most self-defense laws contain the following formula. Now, self-defense laws, state to state, may be a little bit different, but for the most part, they all contain the formula that has 3 parts. 1, there must be reasonable belief that one is in imminent danger of lawful force or deadly force, and authorization to use the corresponding amount of force to defend yourself. So there has to be reasonable belief, imminent danger, and you have to respond with a corresponding force. Okay. Let's take the difference in force and deadly force. I think the easiest way to discriminate between the two is to look at deadly force. And deadly force is not just things that kill you. Now, this definition, again, might vary state to state, but generally, deadly force is any force that is intended or known by the actor to cause, or in the manner of its use or intended use is capable of causing death or serious bodily injury. Let me repeat that because legal jargon is like a mouthful of yarn. Okay. Any force that is intended or known by the actor to cause, or in the manner of its use or intended use is capable of causing death or serious bodily injury. Now, I think what is often missed in that definition are two things, and those are the phrases capable of and serious bodily injury. Capable of means even if it doesn't happen. So deadly force is determined by what could have resulted just as much as if it did actually result. Okay? So the moment that you draw a knife on somebody, your character draws a knife, deadly force is on the table. Even if the knife is never used, because the knife is capable of causing death or serious bodily injury. Serious bodily injury can include broken bones, scarring, loss of function of a limb or an organ, disfigurement even. So anything you could do with a weapon, basically, is considered deadly force. Any jiu-jitsu submission, a whole bunch of judo throws, pinning somebody in a way that impedes breathing or blood flow. Punches are a slippery slope. Again, is basically what the jury decides as reasonable. So, as soon as the weapon comes out, deadly force is happening. And self-defense of deadly force can be deadly. It can be, but remember, it has to be corresponding force. So if a villain approaches your character in a dark parking lot and it just creeps your character out, and your creeped out character draws a knife, they've broken the law. They've done it in two ways. Number one, they've introduced deadly force, and they were not defending themselves with an equal that is equal to the threat. Now, if a knife has been pulled on them, absolutely they can pull a knife back because that's corresponding force. If they proceed to injure the person that creeped them out, so you have two characters in a parking garage, one gives the other the creeps, the one who's creeped out pulls the knife, they may be found guilty, and they injure the person who creeped them out, they can be found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. And if that injury does end up mortal, well, your well-meaning character may be convicted of murder. That said, you got to be sure of the laws in the setting of your work. In Texas, let me tell you what, if you kill somebody in Texas, Texas is probably going to kill you back. You can kill an intruder in your home in Texas, and I don't even think you have to have a license for the gun you use. If the person comes in your home, you can kill that intruder. Now, again, there's going to be different nuances to that, but for the most part, if they break into your home, that is considered a deadly threat, and you can use a gun. I wouldn't use that right off, but still. California, you can't do much, quite honestly, to defend yourself. In England, if you shoot a character or if you shoot an intruder in England, you're going to be going to jail for a couple things. One, murder or attempted murder. But you're also going to go to jail for having a gun at all. You're not allowed to own a gun. That is why knife violence is so high in the UK. And you need to be aware of that. If you write something that takes place in Scotland and it's violence on the street, it's going to be a knife. It's not going to be a gun because it's not legal to have a gun. Okay, here is a real example. Okay, I was in a self-defense situation. And I did pull a knife on somebody. Yes, really. I was terrified. And you know what? I don't even think I realized what I was doing. It was just kind of a gut reaction. And I held the knife up and I pointed it at the guy's face. He looked at the knife and he looked at me, then he backed away. In retrospect, guys, I'm not really sure what I would have done with that knife. This is decades ago, long before I was involved in any sort of knife training. If the guy had advanced, I do believe I would have stabbed him, but I don't think I would have stabbed him more than once because he was larger than me. He would have overcome me before I had a chance to strike more than once, most likely. In order to stop him with one strike, I would have had to go for the jugular, which I don't think I would have done. It's funny how even in a life or death situation, we kind of consider the grossness of things, spurting blood, etc. I could have also gone for the abdominal aorta. But, at the time, I wasn't even aware what that was. Or, I would have needed to stab him in the heart, and the knife I have, I really don't think it was sharp enough to really breach ribs. Okay, so to your point, writers, yeah, sometimes threatening with a weapon works. Okay, I'm living proof of it. I think I would have stabbed the guy. I think I would have, but honestly, I was so zoned out in the moment, I don't know. Either way, it's not the smartest course of action. All right. I did a blog post on this, and it was called Why John Wick Doesn't Threaten with a Weapon. And my point was, what? If John Wick doesn't threaten with a weapon, I'm not sure anybody should threaten with a weapon. In the second John Wick movie, if you have not seen the John Wick movies, the fight scenes in them are absolute perfection. I am also a writer for Black Belt Magazine Jiu-Jitsu, and I recently interviewed Rigan Machado, who is one of the top black belts in the world. He has achieved the status of coral belt. That's above a black belt, and there's only a handful of those in the world. Rigan Machado is not only a decorated fighter and a professor, but he trains celebrities for fight scenes in movies. And he trained Keanu Reeves for John Wick. And I was able to interview him for Black Belt Magazine Jiu-Jitsu. I don't know why it seems like I had a point in bringing that up. But, here it was. That is why the fight scenes are so good. They are not created just by people who know what fighting looks like. Those scenes in John Wick are created by fighters who have fought. Rigan Machado did 365 jiu-jitsu matches before he lost. The dude knows what he's doing. So if you are looking for hand-to-hand or weaponry reference for your work, the John Wick movies are fantastic. Now, are they 100% believable? You can't really get hit by a car 3 times and live unless you're Keanu Reeves in John Wick. But I'm just saying that the fighting is fantastic. And also he reloads his guns. Imagine that. Or he does what I think is called a New York reload, and that's when you run out of bullets, you just grab a new gun. So they are good references, but they are extremely violent. If you have an issue with watching violence, these movies are not for you. In the second movie, there is a scene in I think they're catacombs, basically, in Italy. It's a coronation of a woman. I think it's a coronation of a woman it's kind of like a mob boss. Anyway, there's tons of people down in the catacombs. There's a concert going on. If you have seen the John Wick movies, Giordani, that is his actual name, he will kill a fool. He is an excellent shot. And during this concert, he has done some killing. There is blood spatter on his face. He runs into another character who is named Cassian. And it's the rapper Common, who, y'all, he's adorable. Can we all just admit that? Anyway, John Wick runs into Cassian at the venue, and Cassian's only job there is to protect a person. That's his entire job. If you've watched the movie, you'll find out how good he was at that job. Okay, so John Wick is walking through and he sees Cassian before Cassian sees him. But he doesn't say anything to him. We can only assume that John Wick hopes Cassian doesn't see him, and there's a good reason. Wick has done some damage to someone Cassian should be protecting. John Wick knows that when Cassian finds out what he has done, Cassian will be coming for him. Well, things being what they are, Cassian does see him. Now, John Wick he's walked up behind Cassian before he realizes who it was, and so he walks past him, and he's just thinking, okay, don't say anything to Cassian, maybe Cassian won't see him, but of course Cassian does. And as soon as Cassian sees him, he addresses him, and John Wick knows he's in danger. Now, from that moment when Cassian addresses him, John Wick could absolutely pull a gun to intimidate Cassian to get him to back off. He could. And you know what? Maybe Cassian would back down. Maybe there'd be no escalation. The two would slowly back away. John could safely exit without drawing attention. Seems like a no-brainer. So why doesn't John Wick pull his gun to intimidate the guy and get him to leave him alone? Well, one, because then the movie wouldn't be as awesome. But also, there's like a 99.9% chance Cassian won't back down. And that 0.01% chance that he might just isn't worth the risk. If Wick even moves to draw a gun, even just to intimidate, his counterpart's going to draw and fire. Cassian's as good a shot as he is. And the same is true for Cassian. If he goes for a gun, he knows John will. So the two just stand there waiting for each to make the first move. Normally, action is faster than reaction. Okay, so it makes sense that the person who goes for the gun first will fire off the first shot. But in the case of these two, as trained as they are, I really think the difference in speed as far as action-reaction would be very negligible and not worth the risk. So when John Wick pulls a gun, he's willing to use it for whatever reason he pulled it. And that really is the smartest course of action. You can't bet on intimidation working. If you hesitate to use the weapon you have shown, it could be a mortal liability. Okay, so what about your character? Look, they aren't John Wick. Should they, despite everything written in this post previously at Writer's Digest blog, everything I've said, should they draw a weapon to intimidate after everything I've said here? Well, they shouldn't, but should isn't the same as would. Shouldn't doesn't mean wouldn't. Yes, they might draw a weapon to intimidate. It happens all the time in the real world. I did it. I pulled a weapon to intimidate. When I pulled the knife, my thought was not, I'm going to pull this knife and stab this guy in the face. It was just back off. Okay, I did it. It's a bit of a trope in movies, and it generally involves a woman. I hate that. She pulls the gun and she aims and her hands are shaking and the villain raises his hands, and he smiles, knowing the woman doesn't have the guts to do it. And sometimes he backs away. And then sometimes he takes the gun from her and makes her look like a fool. And then sometimes, to the shock of them both, she actually shoots. Okay, so should your character pull a weapon? No, they actually maybe shouldn't unless they're willing to use it, because then it becomes a liability. But that doesn't mean they won't, because your characters, they have a mind of their own. Okay. If you remember nothing else from the podcast, let's go over a few main points. 1, your characters should not draw a weapon they aren't willing to use, but doesn't mean they won't. If your character draws a weapon just to intimidate, remember, the stakes go up, the law is going to come down, and everything can just go sideways. Again, all that said, your character might draw a weapon they aren't willing to use just to intimidate. They are, after all, human, or human enough, and we humans do a lot of things we ain't supposed to do. So there you go. This was a short episode. I hope that's okay with you. Writers, if you have a book that you would like me to promote on this podcast, reach out to me via the contact form on FightWrite.net. Again, check out my book, FightWrite, How to Write Believable Fight Scenes, and my blog, FightWrite.net. That's it. Until the next round, get blood on your pages.